oftentimes realize that the jobs that we've held up to this point in time, that transcends any work we do. That idea that we have to know how to be able to work well with others, and really become influencers of their thinking. And that's why I always think back, even in the classroom, when I think back to all the times where I feel like, oh, if only I knew then what I know now, and I have to forgive myself for all the things I didn't know. Didn't know that I didn't know. But yeah, so no, thanks for sharing. That's always just fun to think back to on what we did once upon a time. We just partook in our inclusion activity. We are going to engage in it. What I learned this week is called an appreciative inquiry. It's really just the idea that we are oftentimes deficit focused when working with others, and we really want to look at strengths. We're going to take a strengths-based focus, and that idea that we can really become curious about our learners and who they are and where they are in their learning and how we can continue to help them grow. And we also have to be able to do that with ourselves as well, just to look at what we're already doing well, because there are so many things we already do well, and how do we build on that. Then we'll engage in a consultancy protocol, and this is going to help you get some ideas based on some of the learning we're going to go through in the appreciative inquiry, and that will hopefully set the stage for when you go back, because we don't meet again until the end of February. That in the meantime, there's this idea that you're going to be engaging and taking action based on what you're learning at MichME. And we'll continue to learn as you go back and apply some new thinking, and hopefully use some of the resources that you have to continue supporting your thinking. And then we'll go through our implementation guide, the survey, and a brief reflection before we head out. So again, just always reviewing our norms of collaboration: pausing, paraphrasing, posing questions, putting ideas on the table, provide data, paying attention to self and others, presume positive intentions. And today I've highlighted providing data and paying attention to self and others, because we are going to be collecting a lot of evidence to inform our thinking about where it is we feel like we might need to go next for our own learning. So hopefully this will be hopefully this will meet you where you are, and everybody's at a different place. And I know Rusty and Andrew and Marcus spoke to that this morning, that when you have 250 people in a room, it's hard to sometimes meet the needs of every learner because everybody's coming in with something very different. So hopefully you'll feel supported with wherever you are in relationship to what we've been talking about, feedback, and being able to take next steps forward. So, and paying attention to self and others, you're going to really have an opportunity to observe outwardly, but also then reflect inwardly. So this one is really having to kind of, again, develop that awareness of how we operate. Are our words and actions aligned to supporting the needs of the group and my own learning? There's a balance with that at times. So just a quick review of where we've been. Examining our beliefs about learning and the role feedback plays in our conceptions of learning. Clarifying the desired state of our learning environments and how we might more intentionally leverage feedback as a tool for shaping these environments. And today is more of an inquiry and a planning opportunity, and the experimentation is really going to be back in your classrooms. But just setting that expectation that will be an outcome, that really adopting that learner identity and that idea that I'm going to play around with some ideas and really try some things and see what I'm noticing about my learners as we're applying some of those strategies. And then when we come back in February, we'll reflect on where we've been and what the impact has been of some of the things that you've put into action, and then we'll celebrate. Okay, so with this being our focus for today, our outcome, we are going to analyze teacher words and actions and their impact on student thinking and learning. We're going to describe an impactful experience of our own, determine what we might need to know to increase our ability to impact more learners more of the time, and develop a plan for action. So this I put up here because one of the things that came out of the thinking last time was after reading Peter Johnston's work about praise and feedback and how that idea that everything that we say or do has this tremendous impact to open up a student's thinking or shut it down. And then not only do we have that impact, but then the students do as well, because they're learning from us how to give feedback to one another. And from that, at the end, was kind of this idea of what we noticed from a brief video, that these students were able to really engage in critical thinking. And there was a wondering about how does she get them to do that? So I thought about pulling a different video, and I decided we're going to go back to this one because it was kind of chaotic because the speakers weren't working, and I was told they worked today, so we'll hope. But with that, though, we're going to look through some different windows, if you will. So we're gonna work through this idea of windows and mirrors. So first we're going to look at things objectively through a window, and everybody's going to have a different window or lens that you're going to be observing this lesson through, and you're going to be collecting data based on what role I give you, or that you choose. You can choose what you want to do. But I do have some designated based on things that you've been learning about and experiencing either in the morning or that we've been talking about up to this point. And so you will collect specific evidence. And that way, we are really getting a broad and deep view of this 6-ish minute video about what this teacher is really doing that's getting students to think the way they are. We might have to do some inferring, but I think we're going to have a lot of evidence to help us make sense of what might be some things that she's very intentional about that's getting the results that she is. That idea that learning identity where this community of learners is really pushing on each other's thinking and that they are engaged in the thinking and the meaning making themselves. So with that, okay, so we'll go to this video, but as I'm getting that set up, this will all come together, I promise. This is a brainstorm that I have, and I have no idea how this is going to go, but we're going to give it a try. So bear with me. I'm experimenting too. So one of the things that we explored were the 5 categories of feedback. That was our first session. And so I'm going to have one person look at the first 3 categories: judgments, personal observations, and inferences, to see if there is any evidence of the teacher and or the students demonstrating any of those types of feedback. And then I'm going to have 2 people collecting on the other side, the D and E categories. One person will collect information about data, and one person will collect evidence of mediative questions. So if I have anyone who is willing, I'm just going to put these out here. So this one is the 5 categories of feedback. The first 3 categories: judgments, personal observations, inferences. And then one person will do data, one person will do mediative questions. So when you're listening to the language of the teacher and the students, you're going to be writing down evidence of any of those forms of feedback, questions you might have about that part of it. Okay, I'm just going to go over all of the roles, and then we'll have everybody get up and decide what they want to do. Then, I took the framework for teaching mathematics that was shared with us. It was on a yellow paper, and I know I have it. Yes, that packet. You pull that out for me. Yeah, so in there, thank you. Okay, does this ring any bells? It was from one of our morning sessions. So with this framework, I've broken it up into each one of those categories. So the first box says establish math goals to focus learning. So someone is going to collect evidence about math goals to focus learning. And then someone will collect evidence about tasks that are implemented that promote reasoning and problem solving. What evidence do you notice about that? Then as we continue through, build procedural fluency from conceptual understanding. And when I think about collecting evidence, it could be, I'm not sure if it will note the time as we go through there. Maybe if I leave it, if I put it not full screen, I'll have to play with that. But as we, or specifically what you notice, what was said, what was done, or just kind of describing the context of when that took place. Then the bottom section is all about facilitating meaningful mathematical discourse. So, and it's broken up into 4 different aspects of facilitating mathematical discourse. So then there's one for each of those. Okay. Then, in the back of your visible learning books, does everybody have their visible learning books? If you could open up to the very back, and I have mine if somebody needs to borrow, or if you can look on with a neighbor, whichever's. Pages 240, 241, the standards for mathematical practice. How familiar or comfortable is everyone with the standard for mathematical practice? I've seen some no. Okay, good. So what I'll have you do right now is just take a few minutes to kind of take a look at what the different mathematical practices are that are listed along the left side. There are 8 of them. And then it gives some kind of almost some success criteria of what you would see the teacher doing, and then what you might see the student doing for each one of those mathematical practices. So I just want you to take a minute then to get familiar with them. You don't have to know them inside and out, but take a couple minutes to glance at that. And if it helps you to talk about it with a neighbor, feel free to do that as well. Okay. I'm going to pause you there. And while this might be new thinking, I'm introducing to what we're trying to wrap our minds around as far as feedback. I know some of the questions that come up, though, so if I'm not giving praise, if I'm not judging, and we are thinking about more data and mediative questions, and if it's really about wanting to get kids to engage in thinking, what is it that I'm expecting of them, and as far as that thinking, and how is feedback influencing their ability to think in the ways that we would like to see them thinking? So mathematical practices are the processes. They're like habits of mind. I don't know if you're familiar with those, but through the Thinking Collaborative. So when you have cognitive coaching, adaptive schools, and habits of mind are all part of the Thinking Collaborative, which is appropriately named. So the habits of mind, there are, I think, 16 or 18 of those, but these really are, some of these align right with what those habits of mind are, but these are very similar otherwise. These are habits of mind that mathematicians put into practice. These are ways of thinking. And these are things that we really want to be explicit about bringing out of our students. Because then when we're thinking about giving feedback, one of the big takeaways from what all of you shared out was that process versus person-oriented feedback. Is that coming back and ringing a bell? So instead of giving person-oriented feedback, we want process-oriented feedback. Well, what does that really mean? I feel like this is going to be something that's really going to help us move in that direction of more process-oriented feedback. So in this video, that is one of those are some of the that is a focus area. When you look at what it says here, I'm not sure if you can see that all the way down here, and it says all grades, all subjects, and that one of the areas of focus is this idea of mindset, growth mindset, and that we really can influence growth mindset, not just by talking about growth mindset, but by actually enculturating it. It becomes part of who we are and how we operate, how we think together, how we talk with each other. And mathematical practices can really support that when we're talking about math. But they really transcend content in a number of ways as well, you'll find. So mathematical practice number 1 and mathematical practice number 3 on the list are two that are addressed here. So that is what I have here. So on one side, so one person will kind of just ignore the student, what the students would be doing, and you're just going to focus on mathematical practice number 1, make sense of problems and persevere in solving them. And you're going to kind of identify, is the teacher doing these things that it says teachers would be doing if they were influencing them this way? And then another person, so I have two of these that are the same, you're going to ignore the teacher side of it, and you're just going to collect evidence around the students, what they might be doing. Do you see students doing these things in the video? So you might just highlight them or just make notes about where you're seeing evidence of that. And so the same thing is true then for mathematical practice number 3. One person will collect teacher data, one will collect student data. Okay. Let's just get these passed out and then see who we have left, because then I'll tell you what those people will do after that. Okay. So if you have something you really, really want to focus on, feel free to come up, like something you're curious about.
They're both the same.
Okay, and if you don't have a paper, will you please come see me or raise your hand, and I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, here I come. Okay, so I know, I told you this is going to be nutty. One of the things that I would want us to think about is simply what the teacher is saying. Just collecting what she's saying. Someone else collecting what she's doing. What do you notice about, like, her body language? Not any of her speech, just how she's moving in and out with the kids or what she's doing physically. Okay, so there's that. Then students, the same thing. What do you notice students saying? Somebody just collecting what students are saying. Somebody else collecting what students are doing. So do I have that? Anyone?
I'll do the teacher doing.
Okay. Teacher doing.
I'll have the teacher saying.
Teacher saying. Thank you.
I'll do students doing.
Students doing.
Students saying.
Students saying. Okay, then the three of you. This is one might be a little bit more challenging, but if you have your mathematical practices, if you could just maybe see if there are other mathematical practices that end up being addressed, even though that might not be
Other ones
focus areas. Like
outside
number 1 and number 3 are the ones that are focused
okay,
on.
so besides one of
Trying to see if there are any others that are. I don't have copies of those. You'll just have to use your book.
Okay.
And if you notice anything else, just
Yeah.
okay. Thank you.
Today we will work harder to get smarter. Growth mindset.
Okay, I have a quick question. If I leave it like small, then I know we can see the minutes if you want to like time stamp it when you saw it.
You probably can when it's big too.
Okay,
Put your mouse
thank you.
Means believing that your brain
We'll
has
just try it. There we go. Okay. Oh yeah. Leave it right there.
the capacity to grow.
Thank you.
My job as a teacher is to teach my students strategies to help them grow their brains. Oh my goodness, way to be so precise and clear. Are we taking like 2, 1, or 8? 8.
One other thing to note, for some of you, there is sometimes a tip posted at the bottom. They like put some words across the screen. And for some, that might be data for you. Okay.
In life, students are going to need to pursue problems, and they're going to need to be developed as problem solvers who know how to encounter a challenge and work through it to persevere to solve it.
How many star stickers did Sally have left?
Scholars, remind our brains how we solve this. Turn and tell your partner, I solved this problem by. In math in particular, I'm much more concerned with their ability to make sense of a problem and persevere in solving it than I am in them getting the right answer. How many more do I need to take away? 8. How do you know?
Because it said right there, 148.
Today's lesson was a number sense lesson, and students were tasked with subtracting 3-digit numbers in story problems. Mathematicians, that problem felt especially challenging, didn't it?
Yes.
One thing you saw in my class today was my students encounter a challenging problem and really embrace it and get excited. What felt challenging about that, Brenda?
I got stuck on the 30 cut.
I almost normalized that everyone's going to feel stuck, everyone's going to feel challenged by it, so that they can get excited and think about the strategies they can implement to tackle the problem. What can you do when you're feeling stuck?
Can I have some help? I'm feeling stuck about taking away 2 more tens.
Way to be specific, Brenda, about how to get help. Justify.
I'm going to jump up 2 and add on to 200.
Justifying and critiquing is one of the most critical components I can give my students to enable their ability to pursue a challenge.
I solved the problem by doing the statement notation.
That means they're explaining their thinking with reasoning and evidence, and they're asking others to explain their thinking as well to better understand.
I figured it out by doing one strip. What do you mean Ricardo?
When we are tasked with the ability to express ourselves or articulate our thinking, it really illuminates our understanding or our misunderstanding. So when we're asking students to justify their thinking, explain their thinking, sometimes you can see that there are some gaps or some holes.
Example 2. 502. 502. I think it's gonna say 522.
When you invite that into the classroom setting, you're allowing for feedback from other scholars to engage in that thinking, whether they're understanding or misunderstanding it.
I told you should do a strategy like adding up.
I think it really raises the level of rigor in the classroom when students can understand their processing and can also question and understand others. Christian and Sade were having kind of a heated discussion about the most efficient strategy to use to solve this problem. Go ahead, Christian.
I took a jump of 60.
My strategy was
Adding up. What's your question, Sade? What do you think a jump that will make a better number?
I just want to pause and reflect on what's going on here. Already 2 people have shared out the same strategy, but they did it in a different way. Is there another way you can use the tool? One of the ways I feel like I've made a challenge feel exciting is even just through the strategy wait time. Are these worth the same as this? When I see a student struggling, I really zero in on that and I capitalize on it. I say, oh my goodness, I can really see the wheels in your brain spinning. What tool would help me solve this problem? Is a linking cube the right tool? So think, what may be a better tool to use? Hundreds, tens, and ones. Justify.
Because I have 8-digit numbers.
Great.
There's 2 ones, so I think that's 522.
We haven't even found the answer yet, have we? How are you feeling? Even though you haven't found the answer?
Yeah,
Why?
because I'm working so hard.
So friends, I'm going to have to stop you. We ran out of time. We were doing so much thinking. Mathematicians. I saw groups talking about different problems. At the green table, we haven't even solved the first problem. But you know what? They looked so happy. Can you tell the class about it?
We didn't know how to figure it out, but when it was time to go to lunch, we didn't quit. We were happy because we were growing our brain.
Those of you at your desk, give a nod if that feels like what you are feeling right now. This process is probably one of the most exciting things I find about being a teacher. She's saying me too. Seeing my students struggle and encounter a challenge and embrace it is something that leaves me with great peace of mind because I know when they leave my classroom, they'll continue to have that growth mindset. They'll carry it on with them as they undoubtedly experience new challenges in life.
Taking such a mile journey.
I'm really sorry to whoever had to describe everything that she was saying. That was a lot. Okay, so does everybody have something? Or do you need a moment to process and... Good? Everybody good? Okay. So if I could have, now we're going to... Okay, so with analyzing, we're taking a really close look at this. And the reason we broke it up into jobs is because none of us is as smart as all of us, and we can have lots of eyes looking at something and really thinking about this. We can get lots of information that will help us make some informed decisions. Because your time is valuable. And we want to make sure that what we decide to dig into is worth your time, that we're leveraging the most impactful strategies there are to get the most outcome for our students. So how many of you may be familiar with thinking maps at all? Yeah? Okay. So we're going to try and build a ginormous thinking map right here. So I need, if I could have those who had from our first session where we looked at the 5 forms of feedback. If you have one of those 5 forms of feedback pages, would you bring that over, please?
It's very sad because I don't have much.
Which, that's really okay. So actually, would you just share with everyone what you had and what you noticed?
She was hardly anything came from the judgments, personal observation, and inferences. They very quickly I heard a great, and I don't know if it was really her or somebody else, but I was like, oh, I don't know if I should write that down or not because I don't.
It was her.
Yeah,
She's got it. She can collaborate. Okay.
And then that first comment she made earlier where she said that seemed especially difficult, didn't it? And I thought, ooh, are you putting that in their minds like it was difficult and they're just saying that to agree with you? Or, yeah, they really did think it was difficult.
Yeah.
But that's all I have.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
So my hunch was
Yeah.
Okay.
She actually said mathematician. That problem felt especially challenging.
Ah, look at you. Are you shorthand champion over there? Wow, you're good. Okay. And then
I had the data part, and again, I didn't really feel like there was a ton of time she talked about data, but she said 2 people shared out already. And then at the end, she said we haven't even solved 1 problem yet. So
okay.
Kind of what I took as that.
Thank you. And how about mediative questions?
So I had 4 different quotes from the teacher. So she said, remind our brains how to solve this problem. I don't know if it's really a question, but how do you know? What can you do when you're feeling stuck? And what might be a better tool to use? Then I had 4 times when students were saying it to each other. So I heard students say, what do you mean one strip? Can you tell me more about that? Isabella, why do you disagree with me? And why didn't you take a jump that would make a friendlier number?
Thank you for that. So definitely more in the D&E section, which I know a number of us, that was one of the things we wanted to commit to, was ensuring that more of our feedback fell into those categories as opposed to those first 3 categories. And the idea that these first 3 categories they really don't promote thinking or learning, and that can actually shut down thinking inadvertently. So we're already seeing some evidence that aligns to what we learned about at that point in time. So next, if I could have those of you who have the frameworks on the blue sheets of paper, where we'll put together the framework over here. So I think at the top is the learning goal. So whomever has math goal, yes. So what did you notice?
Their goal for the math lesson was a 3-digit subtracting a 3-digit problem. Really going through and reviewing the strategies that they're being stuck. Explain and justify your thinking. Accountable talk was happening for the learning time. Reflection, wait time, struggles, and very evident of growth mindset during the focus of learning.
Okay, thank you. And one of the things I think I noticed her saying too is that, does anybody remember what she said about what was most important to her? What was it? The struggle.
Going through it wasn't the answer, it was how they approached it.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And so then what we're starting to then think about is then if that's really what is most important and that's part of the goal, is that being communicated not only by explicitly stating that, but then her words and actions align to that. Okay, so then we had the 2 here, which are I don't know. Okay, that's purposeful. So implement tasks and build procedure fluency. Would you 2 come over? And what did you notice?
In order to get to that conceptual understanding before they're into procedural fluency, she had pictures of base 10. She had the kids working with blocks, magnet strips, even using an empty number line to share their thinking before they just taught procedures.
Thank you.
I had implement tasks to promote reasoning and problem solving. She did word problems. Challenging work was assigned. She used a justify and critique and group work. And the group, the whole class, when they were sharing, to explain processes.
Thank you. Okay, so then the bottom part is the 4 aspects of mathematical discourse. So that idea that we're actually pushing on each other's thinking and making meaning, constructing knowledge with one another. So then if we'll go through and will you just state which part of meaningful mathematical discourse you have and then what your evidence was?
I had posed purposeful questions, and some of the questions, she really probes the kids and their thinking and expects the kids to justify and explain their thinking.
How many do I need to take away? How do you know? So she was piggybacking a lot of things and saying, how prove it. That problem felt especially challenging, didn't it? Tell me why. What can you do when you're feeling stuck? Is there another strategy you can use? So not just accepting one strategy, but taking it further. Is a linking tool the best for this job? How are you feeling even though you haven't found the answer? Why? So piggybacking on her questions.
Yeah, and even hearing some of that, how are you feeling about it? When we think about social emotional learning, we might not necessarily associate math with that, and she's weaving it and embedding it right into everything that's happening. How are you feeling about that? Yeah, thank you. Ooh, I don't know what those red papers are for. Okay, next.
I had elicit and use evidence of student thinking. And not only did she elicit student thinking, but students elicited student thinking. So I kind of recorded both. Mm-hmm. So they were saying to each other, like, I saw this problem by, and then explaining how they visualized it and used models. She'd ask, how do you know? She had them justify and critique reasoning of others. She said things like, can you explain more of that to show their thinking? Or I agree with you because, or I disagree with you because, using those sentence frames to talk about that with accountable talk. She drew number jumps and had different students explain how they did theirs. And then another thing that she did was just use wait time to allow students thinking.
Thank you. So capitalizing what they are already able to do. So again, that appreciative inquiry. What are they able to do? How can I draw that into the learning environment and capitalize on that? And I think she even says that. Like when she sees a student engaged in productive struggle and she wants to capitalize on that opportunity to find out what's going on up there. Thank you.
All right, I had use and connect mathematical representations, so I just listed the things that they were able to use, so the cubes, the magnetic strips, they were able to just draw sticks, dots, and squares, the number lines with the jumps, but then also when they were going over it as a group, having multiple ones side by side, so making that connection between other people's work on the same problem.
Yeah, thank you.
So mine was support productive struggle in learning mathematics, and I feel like everyone kind of already said what I would say. The biggest part was like when she said, what can you do when you're feeling stuck, and the students, give advice to each other about what they do. When she did the how are you feeling, the social emotional, she really wants the kids to be challenged, and she wants them to struggle and, work hard for getting the problems and not just making it easy on them, making them justify their thinking and talking through their problem-solving strategy, and also critiquing others. So the struggle maybe, asking others what they're thinking and maybe saying, oh, I disagree. This is why.
Yes, thank you for that. Okay, so far we have our 5 forms of feedback, this mathematical framework. Then we just introduced some of the mathematical practices. So those of you who had the teacher side of that, would you come on over? We'll just all 4 of you come over. And actually you guys too. You guys selected some other ones too. So anybody who had something with mathematical practices? Okay, and then just share which mathematical practice you have, and whether you have the teacher or the student, and then what your evidence is.
I have the teacher side, and I did practice 1, make sense of problems and persevere in solving them. So it was really focused on the questions that she was asking. So it was like, how do we solve this? How do you know? What can you do when you feel stuck? My strategy was, is there another way you can use a tool? What tool can help me solve this problem? Justify that. So,
okay.
I was also mathematical practice 1, but I was the student side, so I noticed that they were able to pick different manipulatives to use versus just being told to use base 10 blocks or tiles or something like that, which was really, kind of a new change for me, because I normally give them base 10 blocks and be like, oh, this is what you're going to use to do this, so that was pretty cool. They were also able to question each other, and she acknowledged when a group spent the entire time on one problem and didn't get it done, but they felt like they know that quality is better than quantity, so
they felt comfortable in that, which I thought was really good.
Thank you.
Well, we looked at the mathematical practices she didn't focus on, and I looked at 7 and 8 to see if those were going to arise anywhere. Mathematical practice number 7 is look for and make use of structure. And one of the success criteria for the teacher was to provide an explicit situation for students to develop understanding of a concept. And I thought kind of the word problem that they were working on was that exact situation. And some of the students, they said things like, well, she said, why do we subtract 8? And then they were able to say, well, there's 8 left over. So they're kind of making use of structure there. And when the student talked about the hundreds, tens, and ones using those base 10 blocks, she understood the structure of the place value. And then I looked at mathematical practice number 8, which is look for and express regularity and repeated reasoning. And I thought when they said, I think we should add up, I thought maybe they were making a connection between reasoning they had prior. That might be a little stretch,
But you're noticing, though, that there is some overlap, even though those might not have been the focus areas. Because they're engaged in the thinking they are, some of those others are emerging. Thank you. Okay.
All right. We had math practices 3, construct viable arguments and critique the reasoning of others. I had the teacher side. And so I felt as though the STEM she gave them, I solved this problem by. She allowed the reasoning and the evidence and listening to them, giving them time to turn and talk to each other. She asked, how do you know? She asked a lot, justify. They would be talking and give an answer. She said, justify. That's all she said. And then she checked in on how the kids were feeling. And even though she said, we did so much thinking today when they were done. So, and she helped them to find the most efficient strategy. And she said that there was a heated conversation and had them talk about their different strategies. So,
thank you for that.
Same thing, construct valuable arguments and critique reasoning of others. I just noticed several times that the kids were really, you could tell the language was used a lot in that classroom because they would say things like justify. They would tell each other, ask each other to justify. I disagree with you because I think what you're trying to say is, can you explain more of that? So a lot of that questioning was going on. Other than the girl with the blocks, it was hard to see if they were using concrete models and drawings. I'm assuming they were, but that wasn't the focus. But just a lot of the language and a lot of the questioning was used.
Thank you.
Isabel, why do you disagree with
Right?
I focused on 2 other mathematical practices that weren't part of the focus of the video. One was practice number 5, which is using appropriate tools strategically. So not only were they using concrete tools like the base 10 blocks and the Unifix cubes and pictorial drawings and the number lines and whatnot, but they also were choosing those strategies. So, and also number 6, which is attend to precision, which has more to do with vocabulary than double checking answers. But they were using very precise vocabulary, even naming the strategy, like adding up. She said at the very beginning, she says, way to be precise and clear, so she's re-emphasizing it. And then she also had, I've mentioned the lines for the labels to be precise with how you're communicating your answers.
Yeah. So even if that wasn't the focus, so she was still target talking the other practices. Okay, thank you.
All right, and then I had 2 other practices that were the ones she focused on, but it somehow seems like a lot of these are just intertwined, and I feel like I'm repeating what you just said a little bit, but 2 was our mathematical practice 2 is reasoning abstractly and quantitatively, and so we saw there that they were using a variety of strategies, not just one way to get the answer. And they were explaining their reasoning with evidence. She talked about the importance of articulating your thinking. Mathematical practice number 4 was modeling with mathematics, and we saw on this chart here what students do, and like he said before, they're modeling with concrete materials. They had the base 10 blocks, and then they had paper and pencil, they had the Unifix cubes, and describing how their models relate to the problem
that was presented. So
Thank
sorry,
you.
I didn't realize I was putting this up here. It's all chicken scratch.
Oh, no. It's more just to create the thinking map. So thinking about this, these are all, so when we think about these intentional strategies or teaching moves that press on our thinking, we've been exposed to some of this, again, the framework, the 5 forms of feedback, and while these might be relatively new, I think they're probably kind of, you're realizing like, oh yeah, this all makes sense. So these are all inputs into, now if I could have what the teacher said and did. Well, many of you already collected that evidence that aligned exactly to these different aspects of learning. Here's where I want to put what she said and did. So if you could bring your recordings over. And you don't have to go through all of it, but if there was something that you noticed that you really want to illuminate that stood out to you for some reason as far as what she said or did.
Well, I only kept track of what she said in the lesson, not like the interviews. But pretty much the things that I picked were was feedback, the questions, how do you know, justify, I just want to pause and reflect, why? So she asked, how are you? She was talking about not having the answer and how are you feeling about that. And then she didn't stop there. She said, why? Words that she used when addressing the kids, like mathematicians, scholars.
So sending a very specific message, very intentional about all of her language. Thank you.
So she was definitely on the move, but the thing that stood out to me was how she intentionally got on their level. So like, she made good eye contact, a lot of smiling, but like would also like, even if they were sitting on the floor instead of just standing up and talking to them, she would squat down to get more on their level, or when in small groups, she would put her elbows on the desk to get more at their level. But then, the pausing, giving wait time, doing the motion at the end of taking charge of our learning, and they had a motion to do that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. So really intentional too, even about where she positions herself. That was one of the things we talked about this morning, is that idea of positioning, how we position students and how students position amongst one another. And I'm wondering too what the impact of her intentional positioning, how it positions students with one another as well. And then what the students were saying and doing. If you could come over. And if there's just anything you want to illuminate. I know, again, there's a lot of evidence already collected, but anything that stood out to you?
I think a lot of it is just kind of what was said here and here. They just responded to her, or they would say things like, I disagree, or can you explain more, or what strategy did you use? We got stuck, but we kept working because we were growing our brains, things like that. So.
Okay, thank you.
And then as far as students doing, students were doing a lot. They weren't just sitting back and absorbing. They were active the whole time. Moving manipulatives, base 10 blocks, unifix cubes. At one point they were reading orally, but then they were discussing with each other. They were sharing how they got stuck. They were sharing what their thinking process was. They were talking with small groups. They were talking with elbow partners. They were sharing across from one another. They were sharing next to each other. There was just a lot of continual sharing going on. As they were writing equations, number lines, drawing place value blocks, and continually showing multiple strategies and multiple avenues and entry points.
So really a community of practice, like we are engaged in making meaning together. So with this, so you have to imagine there are lines connecting to here. So with this thinking map, it's helping us visualize the cause and effect of our intentional practices. And then, again, there's already some evidence there, but we want to, then that has an impact on what we say and do. And then what we say and do impacts what happens for learners and how they interact. So with that, when you think about collectively some of the things that you've been exposed to, some of the learning that's been taking place the last few times at MichME, when you take all of this into consideration, what is a statement that you might make? And we'll talk about this in just a moment, but using all of this information, what might be a claim you could make, an impact statement about everything that you've been learning, the effects on our thinking as teachers, and the impact on student thinking, because that was one of the big questions. Because feedback plays a significant role in that, but there are so many other factors that play into giving feedback. And that's one of the things I want you to think about is there are many other factors. It's not just about feedback. And so what might be some of those pieces? So what is, I guess, just kind of a statement you might make about what you're noticing, because this is going to influence then where we go. And you're going to have an opportunity then to kind of make a plan moving forward. So go ahead and talk about that in your groups. I'm going to pause you right there just because I'm realizing it's already 2:23-ish. And I want to make sure we get to some actionable pieces. So if I could just have a couple things that you're noticing, what came out in your conversations. Again, there is absolutely no right or wrong about this because there's a lot there. And that's what I always struggle with when planning these because we're focusing on feedback, yes, but that's already starting to open a door for all the other pieces that play a role in our ability to give effective feedback. So what were just a couple of things that came up in your conversations, if you'd be so kind to share? Yeah.
So we were talking about how, what we thought feedback was on day one is very different from what we realize now. And sometimes, when you were going through all of the categories, I'm like, oh my God, there's a million things, right? But then when we collect the evidence, you can see that a lot of the things repeat in the categories.
Yes.
So if you, one phrase gets you the biggest bang for your buck and might check off, 5 great things that should be there.
Yes.
So just being very intentional about the things that you do can have a big impact. We were talking about how we might not say those things, and how do we get ourselves to start saying those things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And we also brought up if we expect our kids to be able to give feedback to each other, we have to do a better job modeling what that looks like when we give feedback, because they're not just going to magically know how to do it.
Yeah.
But if we're doing it all the time, the more they hear it, the more they'll be able to mimic it.
Yes. Thank you for that. Appreciate your sharing. Other thoughts? Anybody want to add on to that or have something else that?
I'll share.
Yeah.
We were talking about in order to be able to create that environment and to give that feedback and that culture, that not only would teachers in general need to understand all of those rules and the research behind it, but they would have to be convinced that in order to make that shift in your classroom, do you really get the bang for your buck? So how are her achievement results? And I know research is saying that those moves will create a better learner. I just wonder how you get teachers to buy into taking the time to make those shifts.
Yeah, that trusting the process.
And giving up what they've always done.
Mm-hmm. Because it's uncomfortable at first. And that was one of the things I think I heard was, she doesn't seem uncomfortable with this. This is her norm. was that really always the case? Or did she, over time, just like anything else? Yes, thank you. Please.
I think that goes back to the whole gold coin thing, right? What's the gold coin? What is it we're looking for? And so are we looking for achievement results in the form of an M-step, or are we looking for achievement results in the form of the kids are saying, I had fun because I was growing my brain while I was working on this? I think that needs to be, well,
that's the hard part of it. In my evaluation, M-step is part of my evaluation now.
I'm not saying the system doesn't
No, I
push us
know.
towards one way. Yeah. But what's the goal for the kids? I don't know.
What's your hunch based on when you think about the level of thinking they were engaged in? What is your hunch about how they might perform?
In my school, I probably got through half the standards as the teachers in a couple other buildings in our district last year. And a lot of it's because I was putting into process more process learning for my kids. The growth on the NWA for my kids was the same as in the other buildings with half the units taught. So I don't know. To me, I think it's because my kids, when they saw a problem, they didn't shut down and go, I don't know that part. They went, what do I know? And how can I get to a result? So I think that changing the thinking for the kids.
Mm-hmm.
Are you elementary or secondary?
Elementary.
So I'll share a quick story. I have an 8th grader, just to go along with this. This is my own son, who he's in Algebra 1 this year as an 8th grader, and last year as a 7th grader, he was in 8th grade math. So no thanks to me. Other than the fact that, because he would even say, well, Mom, you can't help me, when he'd get all frustrated and be shutting down. And I'd say, maybe I could just pose a question that might support your thinking. That's what I do for a living, so just try me. And with the mathematical practices, I know one of them is about just kind of that idea of being able to find an entry point into the thinking. What do I know about this? And simply posing that question to him, he was able to and of course he said it with an attitude. Well, I know, blah, 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 but then all of a sudden he was like, oh, I know what to do. And then he was fine. And then it happened again just recently. So that was last year. This year, I was looking at one of the SAT math practices, the daily practice. It's an app on your phone. Thinking about the fact that he's got to take PSAT this year because all 8th graders, I believe, are moving to that now. And I said, oh, I'm just curious. Maybe this is something we could think about. You don't have to take the SAT until you're a junior, but it might be fun just to play around with this. Right. When he took a look at the first question, he immediately goes, I don't know what that is. We haven't talked about constants. And he pushes the phone back over to me, and I said, well, what do you know about constant? I don't know anything about it. We didn't learn it yet. Tell me about the word constant. Just, you know the word constant. What does that word mean to you? Whether it's related to math or not. Well, it's when it's just something continues. It goes on. It doesn't stop. And then he looks at the problem again, and he goes, oh, gets the answer, gets it right. And then was able to tell me why he got it right. And he talked about, numbers. They're just numbers. They don't change on their own. And if it's about the constants, and that, then he was able to articulate all that. And I thought, so you haven't learned that yet you were able to find a way to be successful with that because of a mathematical practice, a thinking process that he didn't think to use on his own because he hasn't necessarily learned that yet. So this is where the importance of making this part of what we do with intentionality, because that's going to impact what happens to students in their thinking. And granted, that's one example, but I think we're seeing evidence of it here. And that's what I want you to reflect on now. When you think about some of the times when you feel like there was either whether it's one student or a particular lesson that you felt was successful, would you just take a moment and reflect on that and jot some thinking about what it was? So describe kind of just what the success was, and what did you do that helped make that go well. So this is, again, that appreciative inquiry. I want you to kind of turn and start to question about some of the things you are already doing well. It doesn't necessarily have to do anything with what you're learning about here. It's just things that you already do that you know has made an impact on students. We'll take a couple moments to do that, please. Okay. Now, thank you for sharing the things that are working. We need to be able to we need to be able to celebrate those successes, to remind ourselves that we're already doing so many great things. And then what might be our next step forward? Now, I know we're kind of running out of time, so I'm going to try and make this work as best I can. So if I end up cutting some of the time, at least you'll have experienced this one time through, so that when we come back next time, this can be a process, if you feel it might be valuable to do so, to repeat again after applying some of the thinking back in your classroom. So with this protocol, you're first going to be thinking about a challenge you might have. So you know what is working, and oftentimes we know where we are, and we naturally start to head into, and then I want to get to this point with whatever that might be. I could be wrong about that, but do you already have some thinking? As I say that, are you already kind of going, oh, yeah, because I want, when you think about where you want your kids to be, how might you build on what you already know is working? So what is that challenge from where you want your kids to be and where they are right now, and with what you know is working, what might be a next step forward? So what is that challenge for you right now? So take a moment to reflect on what that challenge for you might be. Just do the best you can to articulate it, and try not to go into the solution. Sometimes we start to dive right into what we think we need to do about it, and not always actually describing the challenge, or what maybe our problem of practice is, or our whatever we might be stuck on. I already heard some of those things popping up in different conversations throughout this, like, oh yeah, the kids really struggle with this. And maybe that's connected to what you've been talking about. So go ahead and just take a minute to reflect on what your challenge might be, and then we'll dive into the hot seat protocol and do a quick round of it.
Quick clarifying.
Yes, please.
Challenges at implementing these things that we're already doing well, or from the day-to-day?
It's really where, when you think about, it might be very much related to what we're talking about. Or it could be just something that's been pressing on your thinking, and it's like, yeah, I really like them to be here. When we think about where we want our kids to be with something. And then I think the framing of what I know is already working is just a great starting place then to think about then where I want to go next to be able to get them from here to here.
Right.
Does that make sense? I know that it doesn't sound, it sounds counterintuitive almost, but. Okay. So with this, we're only going to have time to do one round of this process. So one person will share the challenge, and then the others in the group are going to help consult the person who's then in the hot seat. The person in the hot seat is the person presenting the challenge. What you'll find is, even if you're not the one presenting your challenge this time, that the conversation is going to support your thinking anyway about your own challenge. So even if you feel like, well, I'm not getting to do that, and I want I want those ideas, you really are, it's going to support your thinking 9 times out of 10. So I hope you're not the 1 time out of 10. So if you are if there are just 2 of you at a table, would you please move to a place where we can form, if you're already a group of 3, that's okay, but if at least groups of 3 or 4, just so that we can all experience this with multiple voices. Okay, I'm going to start the protocol, and then we'll get through as much of it as we can.
Okay.
Okay, and the purpose of this is really we are thinking critically about our own practices and developing a shared understanding of how we might maintain our spirit of inquiry, this questioning stance of what's working and what might I try next to support students in their learning so that they are the thinkers and the owners of their learning. And this is going to take us through the process.
Present your challenge. This works best if you isolate the real challenge and tell your group what you've already tried.
Okay, so you see there's a timer. So you're going to have to decide who's presenting the challenge. So if somebody's like, I've really got one, and you guys are all good with that, or if you want to go through and decide by all sharing what your challenge is, and then the group deciding, do you need a moment we'll give you a moment to decide who's going to present the challenge. And then just give me a thumbs up when you've got the one person who's presenting the challenge. You're good? 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 Yes? Mike, are you presenting the challenge? Okay, all right, okay. So you have 3 minutes to present your challenge. Go. I'm going to move us along because we're running out of time. So the next part of the challenge
Clarifying questions. The group asks the person on the hot seat simple questions. The hot seat person replies with brief answers.
So now it's time to clarify any clarifying questions you have. And feel free to take notes if you need to.
Idea sharing. Each group member shares an idea. The person on the hot seat only listens.
So hot seat people, you might want to jot down notes because you are not able to say anything while people share ideas. And one thing to just kind of, when you think of our norms of collaboration and thinking about paying attention to ourselves and others, sometimes we have so many ideas and we just want to be spewing and then no one else has an opportunity to share any thinking because we are limited to a certain time frame. So just making sure that we're making sure that conversation is equitable.
Open discussion.
So now you're welcome to have crosstalk about this. And I'm sorry that I'm having to shorten the times up a little bit, but we'll just keep moving through this. So now it's just open conversation. So you can still keep sharing ideas, but now the hot seat person is also able to engage in the conversation. Normally you would have about 5 more minutes to discuss, but based on our time frame, do you feel like you could come up with some action steps right now? So the person in the hot seat, you are going to write down and you're going to verbalize to everyone in your group maybe you list 3 action steps. What are your first 3 things you're going to do based on the conversation? What are 3 things you might try? What might be your next step forward? With that, I'm hoping that the next step will be relatively simple because we really have some opportunities to think through what it is that you want to maybe be more intentional about going back. Now, again, our entry point was, like we started this conversation about feedback, but you might have another entry point in thinking about some other things that there are some other pieces that I need to develop my thinking about that are related to feedback that maybe I didn't anticipate were related to feedback, and that's okay. Because it's going to enhance, you're going to maintain the thinking about what we've been discovering about feedback and really digging into those other pieces that might be important just for you based on where you are in your learning right now. So, on the bit.ly there, if you're able to help us with the progress monitoring, the feedback for our time today, and then the implementation guide. I know we may not have time to get through all of that right now, but this will be on the Google Classroom, and I can push this out so that you have access to it. But it's just putting in there what it is that you're committing to as far as action steps and collecting evidence related to what you're trying so that you can see the impact on students, just kind of like this cause and effect that we tried to put up here, kind of doing that for yourself. What is the evidence that you notice about what you're doing, and what does that look like, sound like, feel like? What are students saying or doing in response to what you're saying and doing based on what you're being more intentional about? And on the screen. So I don't know if it's yellow or if it's like pinkish. But just some examples of evidence that you could include are just pictures of student work, video of implementation, student reflections. Sometimes just even scribing things can be helpful. And again, I'll push this out to you. And again, I always appreciate your feedback of our time together because it really influences where we go next time. And just a quick reflection when you think about transferring back to your community, and maybe right now, just for the sake of time, that the people who were in the hot seat, would you maybe just share briefly what your next step forward is? And then, was the protocol helpful? If you'd be willing to share that. So whomever was hot seat, you want to just kind of popcorn that out?
I was talking about, I'm going to take that mathematical practices and really evaluate myself on it to kind of see like what areas I'm strong in and what areas I need to work on, and then with data as far as like what am I actually doing in the classroom, and then take one of those practices to really make a focus and an intention to do, and just take it one at a time.
And I appreciate your appreciative inquiry by looking at what you're already doing.
Yeah. That was actually an idea.
Yes. Yeah. Thanks for sharing. Was the protocol helpful? The hot seat. Okay.
So my struggle was just sometimes when students don't have like enough base knowledge, I'll pull them apart from doing like facilitated instruction to like direct instruction. But then I find that only like 6 or 7 kids are being, like when I do my exit slips or cool downs, they're very successful. And then it looked like all the students were understanding it, but they're not. So I'm looking at using more of the, getting more tools to keep kids more accountable, not necessarily during the direct instruction, but the facilitated instruction part, so that I can be more effective and then just flow from group to group and provide that direct instruction, because students do much better when I'm doing that. So I was just struggling with some of the tools, and they gave me some as well.
So really a focus on formative assessment.
Yes.
Which Peter Johnston in our article talked about. Everything we were talking about feedback is formative assessment. Mm-hmm. So really think about that. Thank you for sharing that. And the protocol was helpful for you?
Absolutely.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Yes. Thank you.
For me, it was getting students just to be able to like think critically and problem solve in the classroom more, rather than having like the learning accomplishments. So just getting different ways of what I'm doing now, like what's not working or what is working with like the math interventioners I have with me in the room, and just kind of being on the same page with things. Figuring out ways to do better than what it is now.
So really kind of clarifying that the goal is more about the critical thinking and that students have the capabilities to think. Yeah, thank you. Is that helpful for you? Okay, thank you. Yes, thank you.
So my challenge was meeting the needs of my higher end math, my ones that come in with knowledge or quick learners. And I'm really good at meeting the needs of the struggling kids. I have a special ed background, so that's kind of my forte. But my group gave me some ideas, and I'm going to do some projects-based or some like real-world kind of, so whatever I'm working on, like right now I'm doing fractions. They're going to do like a project based on fractions. Another idea was to peer tutor or create a video explaining, because sometimes I do send, like if kids are absent, I send them a clip of Khan Academy, and they like those, believe it or not. So maybe creating some of those of their own would be a good thing for them too. So a couple of really good ideas for those kids.
Yeah, thank you. Last one, right? Okay.